Now the Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. And when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that the men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people, and Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt by Pharaoh officials and by the people. Exodus 11 and verse 1 to 3. Hearing the voice of God. Look at something here about the voice of God. Now the Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. When the voice of God speaks, it carries judgment, authority. If you look, we have been able to bypass all the plagues from Exodus 6 all the way to Exodus 11 because they are all speaking about the same thing. God releasing plague. But I'd like you to look at this one. When God speaks, his voice carries judgment. Can you just go and dare to challenge somebody who has ever heard God speaking? What happens to you? Or go and speak behind without that man hearing, but God has ever spoken to that person. The voice he had, it carries tonics of judgment. I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. The moment God speaks, his voice carries the energy of divine judgment. That's why you notice you may pray around the man of God and your life scatters and you fail to understand why. Because the voice of God that he had, the voice of God, the moment you hear it, that voice doesn't end. That voice remains vibrating, releasing the tonics or the energies of that voice. So the voice of God, that is why it is very, very, very important to hear the voice of God, because it makes you cannot be condemned, but you condemn. You cannot be judged, but you judge. Number 2, he says, and that he will let you go from here. And when he does, he will drive you out completely. 2 things. The voice of God carries deliverance. He says, after that, he will let you go from here. That is deliverance. That is freedom. That is liberty. That is salvation they were seeking. So it is good you keep on hearing God speaking, because when God is speaking, his voice itself, it commands your captives to release you to your freedom. There are people who are held captive or in slavery by demons, by Satan, by witches and sorcerers, by soul ties. You just entered into an intercourse, and from that time you are still held in captivity by that person's sexual hook or a jack. But when God speaks to you, that what is holding you lets you go. Galatians 5 verse 1. Something else is he will drive you out completely. That means the voice of God carries absolute salvation. He will drive you out completely, not partially. There are people who get delivered, but it's partial deliverance. So you find you are born again in the spirit, but the soul is still in captive. The body is still in bondage. When the voice of God speaks, it says, the voice of God says that he will drive you out completely. So you are driven out of the kingdom of darkness, of the world system, completely. The body, soul, and the spirit. When you hear the voice of God, and he says, if you look at that, he is telling, the Lord is still telling the Moses, tell the people that men and women are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. This is very sweet, because when the voice of God is speaking, it carries prosperity energy. God cannot speak and you continue functioning with the poverty. The moment God speaks to you, you will notice men and women of financial dimensions, they start to connect with you. You notice now the kind of the friends, relationships, and connections now you are making has a financial dimension in it. Tell the people, men and women alike, to ask the Egyptians for gold and articles of gold and silver, and they were given, just because God said. If God speaks right now you hear the voice of God, money will start to accept you. And he says, the Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed towards the people. And that one is what you saw in Exodus 3. We did not look at it. In Exodus 3 and verse 21. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed towards these people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask their neighbors of articles of silver and gold, and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. So the voice of God carries what? Favor. The Lord had told Moses, I will give these people favor that exposes vulnerably, so that you can plunder them of their economic power. If God speaks to you, you will notice you start commanding favor that is possessive. You speak, or you act, or you possession yourself, and you find people surrendering to you. And they don't just surrender, they surrender what makes them to be them. You will find people giving you what they hold preciously, because the voice of God carries with it plundering power. The voice of God carries with it exposable favor. The voice of God carries with it a financial dimension, and the voice of God carries with it a judgment authority, and the voice of God carries with it salvation and deliverance energy. So when the God is speaking, there are things you start to experience. He can just come and say, Joel, and he say, here I am. And maybe God doesn't speak again. Does that say anything? So I will focus on the Lord just uttered around a word to come out of his mouth. That word that came out of his mouth carried hot potential, carried hot energy, carried hot power. So why is God speaking to Moses here? The reason of God speaking to Moses here is appointed time. When you enter into your appointed time, God speaks to you. It is in Exodus 12 and verse 40. Now the length of the time the Israelites lived in Egypt was 400 years. At the end of the 400 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt, because the Lord kept the vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. So if you enter into the appointed time of God, God speaks to you.